Just getting ready for it to stream here. All right, good to go. Okay, welcome everybody. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us here in the Zoom room, tribe members. So those of you tuning in on Facebook right now, I want to welcome a very special guest. His name is Bill Plotkin, and he's the author of a new book, his latest book, which is called The Journey of Soul Initiation. He's a depth psychologist, wilderness guide, and founder of Western Colorado's Animas Valley Institute. And he's led thousands of women and men through nature-based initiatory passages. And his previous books, if you're unfamiliar with his work, they include Soulcraft, Nature and the Human Soul, and Wild Mind. Awesome. And today we're going to be discussing Bill's new book, which is The Journey of Soul Initiation, subtitled A Field Guide for Visionaries, Evolutionaries, and Revolutionaries, which is a presentation of what he calls the 5 phases of descent to soul, a model that is different than your previous writings, correct? And
yes,
in other models for initiatory journeys, including Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. So I'm really excited to discuss this book. It's got so much depth to it, and for me it's deeply relatable for me in terms of my own journey. And one thing I'd love to get into on this call, just on a personal level, is kind of finding out where I am in that journey, and hopefully other men tuning in can kind of plot themselves on that graph. Not that it's necessarily a linear path, my take is, but yeah, it's pretty powerful, profound work that goes beyond a lot of the worldly things that we focus on in terms of like our success-driven ideas of maturity and adulthood. And so, yeah, I'm really grateful to have you here, Bill. Thanks for being here.
you bet. Great to be here with you, Soma.
Yeah. So why don't we start out, for men that haven't read the book, have you talk about just the context of the book, why it's oriented towards maybe those that would consider themselves to be visionaries or revolutionaries in some way. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the book is, as an overview, it's a presentation of what I call the Journey of Soul Initiation. That's the title, of course. And it's an initiatory journey that has pretty much completely disappeared from the Western mainstream, probably thousands of years ago, actually. So it's not what we usually think of as initiation in the contemporary Western world, because it's, as I say, it's something that as an understood, recognized process or journey, it's been lost for quite a while in the contemporary world. This is not to say that people don't go through the journey, but we don't have, I haven't found previously a map, or even in depth psychology, anything that really directly refers to this journey, which we have good reason to believe that all healthy, mature, nature-based cultures have had some kind of version of this, or at least a precursor of it. So it's important first to understand that it's rare, although the experience itself, as I say, there are people who go through it without much of an understanding often of what's going on for them. And the journey of soul initiation in a healthy cultural context would typically take 5 to maybe a few more years. It's not something short. It's not like a rite of passage. In fact, it isn't a rite of passage at all. It's an initiatory journey with several aspects to it. So the reason for the subtitle, which it says it's for visionaries, is that, well, it says it's for three things, but first, visionaries. The journey of soul initiation results in what I call, if it goes well, and it's a joyous, but also quite of a harrowing and dangerous, psycho-spiritually and often physically dangerous journey. But if it goes well, the person who emerges on the other side is what I call a visionary artisan of cultural evolution. And when we're living in a context like now, which is in a life-destroying society, I take it everybody listening to us understands that we are a life-destroying society and have been for a while. When we're living in this kind of context, you could change that last word in that four-word phrase I just gave you. We could say a visionary artisan of cultural regeneration or of cultural renaissance, which of course is what we need now. I've come to understand that the root cause of every crisis in the world at this time, every major crisis, is a kind of arrested human development, that the societies in the world now with the largest populations, which Riane Eisler referred to in her book, The Chalice and the Blade, referred to our kind of societies as dominator societies that contrast with partnership societies. And so let's see, I might have lost my thread there where I was going
Yeah,
about.
that's cool.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, I mean, what it sounds like is the journey of the soul. I guess in our modern context, we've kind of lost a supportive structure that allows that natural soul's evolution that maybe in the past was more of an integrated experience into other cultures, past cultures.
Yes, very much an integrated experience. And the way that healthy societies approach childhood is, in a sense, in part, it's a preparation for this journey that happens later. Maybe in a healthy society, the journey of soul initiation might start as early as the mid-teens. In our contemporary society, for most people, it never starts. I'm guessing that maybe 10 to 15% of contemporary people ever get to the stage of life where the journey of soul initiation takes place. So the reason I included the word evolutionaries in the title is because I believe a true adult, an initiated adult, which is what I mean by a visionary artisan of cultural renaissance, a true adult is actually can consciously cooperate with evolution, not by figuring things out, but by embodying the gift that that person was born to embody in this lifetime. And the reason revolutionary is in there is because at this time in the world, when we are living, most people on the planet are living in life-destroying societies, what's called for is, of course, a kind of revolution. But it's not a revolution that's primarily driven by the strategic mind. It's driven by something deeper in the psyche, which I refer to as the soul. So probably let me pause right now just to give you my definition of the soul. I'm trained as a psychologist, both a research and a clinical psychologist. So and this is back in the 70s. So my training, the way I was taught to understand soul is in psychological terms. But what psychologists had to say about the soul never quite fully rang for me. And then some number of years ago, it occurred to me that what's being referred to is primarily an ecological concept. Soul is really ecological. And my definition is simple, that the soul of anything is its unique ecological niche. the unique place or ecological function that it was born to take in this lifetime. And we know that about other species. That's the way ecologists talk about other species all the time, that
Mhm.
every species has its unique niche. But we don't often hear ecologists talking about us, humanity, that way. What's our niche? And there's all kinds of interesting speculations about that I won't go there right now. But uh, some indigenous peoples that I'm aware of, maybe all of them for all I know, say that not only does each species have a unique niche, but each individual within each species has its own unique niche, its own function, its own way of contributing to its clan, its people, and to its larger ecosystem. So I've come to believe that that has got to be true for us humans too. We're as natural and wild in some ways, creatures as anything else on the planet. So we as a species have our own niche, and as each individual has their own niche. And that again is what I mean by the word soul. It's the it's our what indigenous people might call our personal individual instructions. It's what we were born to do, and it can never. Here's a big thing to really get here. It's kind of a leap for a lot of people, that what we were born to do can never be defined in terms of a social role or a vocation or a career or a creative project. Because that's the way we think about it, isn't it? That about when we think about purpose. My purpose is to maybe have a certain career or a certain social role, a certain place in the community or the village. Um, but I believe we're, again, like every other species, in that we're actually born to serve the larger Earth community in a certain way. And most every human, initiated human, I mean soul initiated human, does that through a particular discipline or art and so forth. So our job, if we have one, or our career, if we have one, or our social role, is our delivery system for the unique gift we were born to give. And this one last dot connection here, and I'll pass it back to Soma, and that is what we learn during the journey of soul initiation is, in fact, what the gift is that we were born to offer, not just our human people, but to the larger Earth community. That's the goal of the journey.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, and it's great. You're kind of answering questions I had as they come up, so it's good.
Great.
Um, yeah, I love that, and uh, what I what I find so profound about that, and also where I see a lot of men getting tripped up because I don't know if you're familiar with like the men's work world, but there's a lot of emphasis on like finding your purpose and having a mission, which is great, and I think it can actually mess a lot of guys up, because they're trying to force themselves into this, force like a a circle into a square, so to speak, that this, and I imagine the soul, as you talk about it, having like more of a mythopoetic identity, which is very different than, I guess, the distinguishing piece between that and like our ego identity, which is like, the more worldly role that we deliver the whatever permutation of that soul purpose into this world through as like a medium, and I think we grasp onto the medium of it, and then don't allow ourselves to go on the deeper journey of discovering something that's hard to put into this, even into words sometimes, right? Yeah, so I'd love for you to share a little bit about that, because I think there's a lot of men that will wrestle with this idea of purpose, and simultaneously, like, they might get these nudges from life or nature saying, like asking them to do something that's really uncomfortable, um, and sort of shed some of the identity that they've forged to function in this world. And I'm wondering, like, how would somebody hold both? Like, you know, soul, there's this kind of soul breakdown going on, and they still need to like show up and make money and be a father and engage in society. I mean, do you think this is something that we can actually, a typical person can actually hold, or do they need to get to a certain stage of development and function in the world, and the kind of privilege of having the space to go into this kind of journey?
Yeah, well, great series of questions
I know
there.
there's a lot there.
I took notes, so
Yeah, good.
maybe I'll be able to hit the major points.
Yeah.
The first thing is, yeah, you use one of these phrases that's one of the most important in our work, and that's mythopoetic identity. So let me connect some dots there. As I mentioned, during the journey of soul initiation, we discover this gift we were born to give the world, or as the poet David White puts it, one of the ways he puts it, is we discover the truth at the center of the image we were born with. That's something to wrap our minds around, that we're each born with an image, at least poetically speaking, we're born with an image, and there's a truth at the center of that image. And it's, since we're born with it, it's not easy to put it in linguistic terms. It's before we've even learned a language. Um, we might even be born to parents who have one language and get adopted at age one day, to parents with a very different language. So what we're born with, that those original instructions, or that innate knowledge, is not something that can be embraced or couched in linguistic terms. So again, you'll remember that I mentioned that I think of soul as an ecological niche. But when we come to understand it, when we have what that experience that I call soul encounter, it's not it's not like the way you would describe in human language an ecological niche. The way our human consciousness points to or suggests our unique ecological niche, our soul, is through metaphor. And so we come, and that's what I mean by mythopoetic identity. It's a metaphor that we are shown. We don't choose it. It's something that we're given during the journey of soul initiation. So it could be like a symbol, or some version of what we call archetypes, or it could be something that comes through a dream, or it can be through a interaction with some other kind of being in nature, in the natural world. Mine was through an interaction. My first soul encounter was through an interaction with a spruce tree and a butterfly during my first vision fast. And by the way, a vision fast is not at all necessary for soul initiation, but it's something we find around the world as one of the most common spiritual technologies for soul encounter. And maybe I'll come back to the story in more detail later, but the butterfly, it was just on the fourth day of my fast at tree line, 11,500 feet in early fall in Colorado mountains. A butterfly flew to me and actually brushed one of her wings against my left side of my face as she went by. And I heard in English the words cocoon weaver. And I wasn't expecting anything like that. But to make a much longer story short, or shorter, I not only came to understand that what I was born to do in this lifetime was to help others as well as myself create what would correspond metaphorically to a cocoon of transformation, to help other people move from adolescence to true adulthood. But not only does a soul encounter give us information? That's not even the important part. It's kind of like being struck by lightning, and our egos are shape-shifted over a period of months, sometimes years, by that soul encounter experience. That one little brush on my left side of my face by that butterfly wing, and hearing those two words, which you might say my muse, my deep imagination translated into English for me, set up what we might call an alchemical process of transformation of my psyche that took a few years to even build a foundation. Okay, so that's the connecting the dots between mythopoetic identity and soul. And then this really, really important topic of purpose that you brought up, Soma. Most everybody in the contemporary world longs for what people would generally call purpose or personal meaning. And no wonder. I mean, we're all designed or born as humans to want to belong to the world in a way that is meaningful to us. And so for shorthand, we say purpose. But I've mentioned before that I believe only about 15% of contemporary people ever reach the stage of life in which the journey of soul initiation takes place. And I call that stage the cocoon for obvious reasons, partly having to do with my soul encounter, but it's when we are transformed from a human version of a caterpillar to a human version of a butterfly or a moth, a flying creature. So it's this transformational experience. But the stage before the cocoon is what I call the oasis. It actually has different names depending on whether it's a healthy stage or not. And in the larger scheme of the of my understanding of life stages of the development of a human, in accordance with how our species has evolved to develop, is that the oasis actually corresponds to early adolescence. I don't mean our teen years. I mean a psychological stage that starts at puberty. And my guess is that about 85% of contemporary humans never get beyond that stage of early adolescence, which I call the oasis. I mean, that's a really troubling idea if that's true.
Yeah.
But if I can pause here with the other answers, consider the state of the world right now and the fact that our species is literally destroying life. If that's true, I mean, given that that's true, there's something that has gone very, very, very wrong with most of our human societies. And I believe I'm simply naming what's gone wrong, which is kind of widespread arrested human development that most people get stuck in early adolescence. And again, the journey of soul initiation takes place in the next stage, which corresponds to late adolescence. And another way to say it is the journey of soul initiation is the several year long process that a human goes through to become a true adult or an initiated adult. Okay, back to purpose. I'm
Mhm.
sorry, but I have to kind of set up
No, it's
these
good.
basic
Yeah.
ideas to make the main point.
Yeah.
So there's early adolescent purpose, and then there's adult purpose, which we discover and are changed by in late adolescence. These are very, very different kinds of purpose. What the word means is very different. So most everybody who's talking about purpose these days is appropriately, this is not a criticism, is appropriately talking about what I would call early adolescent purpose, which is how do I fit in socially and vocationally? Like, what is the kind of work or art or craft or discipline or social role that fits who I am on the personality level and would allow me to contribute to my people? Social, vocational purpose. And in a healthy culture, people in the stage of early adolescence would have no great difficulty developing a very deep sense of this purpose in this early adolescent sets. But in our societies, let's just look at Western society in particular, we have trouble discovering or even shaping our social or vocational purpose because of developmental deficits from childhood. I think maybe I won't go into that right now in detail, but we get to early adolescence, and the developmental task in early adolescence is to consciously fashion a social presence that is both authentic and socially accepted, at least in our peer group. And when we're teenagers, our peer group is just our group of friends. When we get older, and if we're still in early adolescence, our peer group might be the people we work with and our best friends in our in our area and so on. So the reason purpose is so hard for people to, this early adolescent purpose is so hard is because authenticity has become so difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it's hard to become authentic, well, let's take a look at what that means in an early adolescent sense. It means to be aware of one's true values. And by the way, every person's true values are at least a little different than your parents', sometimes a lot different. But in childhood, you had to learn your parents' value system, even have an understanding of what a value system is. You have to become human in the particular way your parents know to be human. Then after puberty, then we all have the task of asking ourselves, okay, with this hopefully beautiful foundation my parents gave me, sometimes it's not so beautiful in our society, but based on the foundation I got from my family, not just my parents, um, what's my version of authenticity? What are the things I'm really interested in? What are the subjects? What are the like in school, or what are the realms of life that I'm discovering exist that really draw my attention, that helps me come alive and feel alive? How am I in relationship to my emotions? How do I uniquely express my emotions? What's my sexuality? What's my gender identity? These are all essential questions for early adolescence. And then as we grow into these discoveries of who we are socially, sexually, creatively, and so on, then we have to fashion one or more versions of that person that fits into our peer group, that is accepted in our peer group, because social belonging is everything in early adolescence. But it's not hard to be accepted by your peer group as long as you're willing to be a complete fraud. And there's too many young people and adults in early adolescence who recognize at some point that they're fakes, they're imposters, they're impersonating somebody else, some other kind of person, which means they didn't develop their authenticity as fully as they could. Alternately, if one's childhood went well enough that we're capable of tuning into ourselves on any deep level, then authenticity, creating an authentic self, is relatively easy. But especially if you don't care about having any friends. So you see, doing the two things together, authenticity and social acceptance, can be challenging. And in our culture, society, it's particularly challenging. And that's exactly why people get stuck in early adolescence. They don't end up fashioning an authentic, socially accepted persona.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure there's a lot to explore on that topic alone, how to move through that stage. But we won't completely dive into that on this call. But that makes sense. So, we kind of need to fill this kind of vocational role in the world from authentic place, and because of certain childhood development, you know, conditions, a lot of people find it hard to really tap into their true values, and that's a lot of the work that I do with men in particular, is like, that more of that sense of purpose, which is still not an easy thing to tap into, right? Because there's so much telling us to conform to what society wants or what mom or dad told
Exactly.
us we should be.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm. Yeah. Great. Um, so just trying to see, I don't even remember what I asked you initially, see if you completely responded to that.
Yeah, no, there's still some pieces.
Okay. Yeah. Why don't we
Yeah.
go there if you remember?
So yeah, moving us along from early adolescence into the cocoon of late adolescence. I'll say a bit about what kind of experience people have when they're in that passage, because that's a life passage between the oasis and the cocoon. And by the way, a rite of passage is something that helps someone who's going through a passage um, orient to this profound change they're going through and to begin to get familiar with the new stage of life. And what I just said um, reveals how I've come to understand what a rite of passage is, which turns out to be the classical way to understand it, which is very, very different than the way most contemporary people understand a rite of passage. We think in order to get to the next stage, we need a rite of passage.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly wrong. In, in order for a rite of passage to be relevant, we need to have already gone into the next stage. And a rite of passage celebrates and formally marks that someone has gone through a passage. Actually, a little more accurate way to say it would be is in a passage from one stage to the next. And the rite of passage lets the whole community know here's someone who could use some support because they are leaving one whole world that we call a given stage of life and moving to another one. And they're not going to know how to operate in this new stage immediately. And this rite of passage will help them understand what it is that they're going through. And the rite of passage didn't make them go through it. It's, I like to say, mystery. Mystery decided or recognized that they had done enough work in the stage of life they had been in. They succeeded so beautifully or beautifully enough at that stage that it's time to move into the next stage. A rite of passage recognizes that is happening to someone and helps them do it. Okay, so back to this passage from early adolescence to late adolescence, from the um, oasis to the cocoon. And I call this passage confirmation. Confirmation. Partly because in certain religious settings, there's this passage called confirmation. But this is something really, really totally different. What's being confirmed is two things. The first one is that this person has succeeded at creating a social presence that is authentic enough and works well enough in their peer group. They did it. They now know how to consciously create a social reality, a role. And the second thing that's being confirmed is that they're ready to begin the journey of soul initiation. So for a person who achieves confirmation, that passage, these are some of the things that's typically true of that person. Um, as the passage begins, they're very clear about their identity and they recognize that they're authentic to who they really are on a personality level. And they're accepted in their peer group and really appreciated in their peer group. And in a sense, they're at the pinnacle of their social development. They're someone who has succeeded in the way that our contemporary society generally considers success. Well, at the healthiest dimensions of our society. They're not necessarily millionaires,
Mm-hmm.
or they might not have any particular amount of money at all. But they know how to create a meaningful, loving relationship with a romantic partner and with friends. And they know how to be real with friends, and they know how what emotions they're having when they're having them, and they have the experience that every single emotion is sacred and there's no such thing as a toxic emotion from their healthy center. From some of our, what I call inner protectors, there are toxic emotions, but not to our healthy ego, there isn't. And they know how to express their emotions, and they know how to access their dreams and their deep imagination and so forth. So these are relatively healthy people. So the journey of soul initiation does not start for anybody who hasn't achieved these basic kind of psychosocial successes. It's when we've succeeded at creating this socially accepted, authentic social presence that we're moved into the journey of soul initiation. And there we're looking, the quest is to discover and be changed by our purpose that's not at all socially definable or vocationally definable, but is ecologically defined. And part of the journey of soul initiation, the way I put it, is the core or central spiritual adventure that has to happen at least once during the journey of soul initiation is this experience I call the descent to soul. And the descent to soul can last anywhere from a few weeks to over a year within this larger journey of soul initiation, which is several years long. And I won't go there right now, but just to say that it's during the descent to soul that we discover our mythopoetic identity, which points to our unique ecological niche. And one last point you brought up, Soma, this wonderful series of questions was about privilege. And these days in the world, it's an exceptional privilege to be able to not only complete early adolescence, but to begin the journey of soul initiation and to receive guidance for that. Because in most part of the world, many parts of the world, life is all about, for humans, life is all about survival. And how am I going to feed my children today? And people in those circumstances don't have the luxury or the privilege to be asking the kind of questions that those of us on this call most likely are able to ask. But it's a kind of privilege that every human ought to have. And in every healthy culture, every human does have this privilege. And one of the big questions for me at this point in my life is, how can we begin to create the foundations that of beginning to build again, or reinvent, if you will, healthy cultures? And I believe that truly mature cultures will take several generations to generate. But a merely life-sustaining society is something that not only can we do in a lifetime, but we have, according to scientists, we have to. If we don't do it this century, some scientists say in the next 10 years that we risk either going extinct ourselves as a species, or all of us in first world societies will be in survival mode ourselves. So this is the most urgent task, is not the journey of soul initiation, but using our clever strategic minds to create life-sustaining societies. Okay, I'll pause there, Soma.
Yeah. Yeah. So good, man. I'm really grateful for the depth you've gone into kind of organizing this body of work, and so much of it really makes sense to me. I think one question that comes up for me in the share, and just kind of overlaying my own life journey, is you know is there any kind of overlap? It's like you kind of map it out in this somewhat linear way, right? Of like, you got to go through this stage to get to this next stage. And I've certainly gone through a lot of my own existential crises at different times, which have brought me into what feels like a deeper relationship with my own soul. And yeah, so I'm just kind of curious, like, how, if there's like this interplay, because I imagine there's sprouts of the soul coming through even in this adolescent phase of purpose, that prisms of that shining through what somebody's values are in some way, right? Does that make sense, what I'm asking?
Um, oh, I think so. Do you
Yeah.
want to say a little bit more? I could take it from there, but
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the gist of it. I'm just kind of looking at, like, is it really, you need to complete this to get to here, or in some ways, like, even in your book, I think you talk about collectively we're going through this initiation process too, and so sometimes I wonder, like, if it gets a little messy in the process of soul wanting to be born more into its ecological niche in the world.
yeah. Let's see. So I do feel that stages of life are something you could call them linear,
Mm-hmm.
although I'd call them sequential and cyclical,
Mm-hmm.
which is in a certain way kind of linear. So the nature-based uh, map, I call it a wheel of human development, which is looking at the stages of human life as nature intends us to go through this sequence. Um, that's outlined or described quite comprehensively in my book, Nature and the Human Soul. It's one of my earlier books, Nature and the Human Soul. And it is sequential. We go from stage 1 to 2 and 3 and 4 and so forth. Early adolescence being stage 3, late adolescence being stage 4. But here's something that makes it a little bit less than linear, and that is no person is ever fully complete with the tasks, the developmental tasks of any stage. It's not like you're 100% complete. You're just that you've succeeded enough at that stage for mystery to move you into the next stage.
Right.
But it turns out that how fully we can inhabit the stage we're in is partly a function of to what degree we've completed the tasks of earlier stages. So sometimes we got to revisit the task of earlier stages. I mean, often we have to, but that doesn't mean we go back to that stage. We're still in our current stage, but we can address the tasks of earlier stages
Mm-hmm.
from our current stage. One example has to do with meditation or other contemplative uh, practices. So a person, for example, could be in the oasis or the cocoon um, and discovered, in essence, that one of the tasks of early childhood was not complete as it should have been. Well, let's back up a second and say, wait a minute, a child in the first 3 or 4 years of life doesn't have any tasks at all. I mean, we can't relate to having a task in the first few weeks and months and years. So it's actually our families that have the developmental tasks on our behalf. And how well our family members will do on our behalf in our first 3 or 4 years will depend on how mature our family members are. But we already know that in the contemporary world, most family members, 85% of them, have never gone beyond early adolescence. And that's why whole societies get stuck, because there aren't enough true adults and elders around, or there aren't enough parents who are true adults. So one of the developmental tasks of early childhood is the preservation of innocence. That's what a family is supposed to do on our behalf. And preserving a child's innocence is very similar to, I'm just going to say it this way to make it a little bit easier to talk about, is helping them stay present to the world as it is, and not distracting them from the world. So, to almost any significant screen time for a child in early adolescent, early childhood is going to undermine this developmental task.
Mm-hmm.
And so we get so many people who are in adult bodies who have a really challenging time just attending to what is present in their moment. So a meditation discipline, as we all know, can help us train our attention to redevelop that capacity. But that's not the way it would be developed for a child in their first 3 or 4 years of life. So you can see if you're in stage 3 or 4, or even later, and we realize that I don't have as great of a capacity as I should of just staying present to what's here and now, then a meditation discipline can help us do that. And that's a very, very different way than it would have been done in early childhood. That was my main point here, just to
Mm-hmm.
give you an example of that.
Yeah.
So linear, not linear. We do often have to go back and address the tasks of earlier stages. And so, give me some feedback here. So am I
Yeah.
responding to your question?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The kind of, yeah, the need to, move forward, yet, there might still be some pieces to the puzzle missing. So we have to go back and maybe complete those at certain stages in a way. Yeah. Yeah, that's great. So, yeah, so in terms of, yeah, I want to bring it back to, I mean, I know you touch on all of these pieces in the book, which are tying back into your other works. And I think it's important to not, try to skip ahead. Like I want to just move into this final stage. And I guess what would you say, like, how can we create spaces for the completion of these pieces in a way that really allows, in particular for men, to kind of move into the final stage? And I'm kind of selfishly asking this question because this is a lot of the context for the work that I do.
Yeah, okay. Not sure what you meant by final stage. I mean, the final stage is late elderhood.
Yeah, maybe that wasn't the right term, but the sort of movement into adulthood
Yeah.
stage, that where we, and I talk a lot about leadership in the work that I do, and what resonates a lot for me about this work is this need for mature leadership, where we're not, in a way, trying to fulfill our wounds through the ways that we're like running our businesses and being in relationship and leading in the world. And I see a lot of that going on in contemporary culture.
Yeah. Well, again, okay, so I believe that 85% of people past puberty in the contemporary world in dominator societies are in early adolescence and stuck there. But it's not that hard to get through it. And you could say getting through it is a type of preparation for the journey of soul initiation to start later. And one of the key set of resources is something I try to put together in my third book, which is called Wild Mind, in which I present the nature-based map of the human psyche. And it looks like, what are the parts of a human psyche? And what do we need to develop? So primarily that book, or at least the first half of that book, is about what I call the 4 facets of human wholeness. And these are innate. Every human psyche is born with the capacity to develop these 4 facets of wholeness. But contemporary society tends to suppress or neglect, at least, the cultivation of all 4 of these facets. And if you read Wild Mind, you'll you'll find all four facets to be somewhat familiar. It won't sound esoteric. You'll understand what I'm writing about there. And you'll also be able to see that there are practices and workshops and so forth available for people in the contemporary Western world to help them develop all four of their facets. But here's the problem, is that I've never seen a map that outlines all four facets and their relationship to each other and puts it all together holistically. And that's what one thing the Muse asked me to do starting about 30 years ago. And the result is this book, Wild Mind. So the content is familiar to people, but the map and the way it all comes together is, I think, somewhat unique. And here's why I'm going to emphasize, I'm not trying to, primarily promote this book and sell it, although that's fine.
You can do that here. That's cool. I'm
But
trying to do that for you. Yeah.
I'm really making this point is that one of the, I guess you could almost say, pathologies of the Western world is it's all about competition and winning and being better than others. And so one way to say this is that we put in the contemporary world, we put more of an emphasis on proficiency and prowess than on wholeness and balance. That we have the sense of, I'm going to get this great job or I'm going to win this romantic partner, I'm going to have to stand out and I'm going to have to be recognized as magnificent in some particular way. And so there's an emphasis in our society, correct me if I'm wrong, that if a child or a youth has a certain talent, you're going to help them just keep really hone that talent and really stand out. And, in the most crass perspective, become a millionaire by the time they're 30, or to be prepared for the Ivy League colleges, or be able to run up that corporate ladder faster than anybody, because we took their strength and we really kept honing it. Okay, that's not wholeness. So one of the primary things we do at Animas Valley Institute with this map, nature-based map of the human psyche, is we don't spend a lot of time identifying people's strengths, but identifying their weaknesses. But here's how I mean it. Maybe that doesn't sound so good. Again, on the map, there's these four facets of human wholeness that every person has. There's an idea around, and this is one of the ones that Jung had his version of this idea, Carl Jung, that we're each born with a particular strength in what I'm calling a facet, he called functions. And the other three tend to be weaker, well, by definition, weaker. And one of those other three is really weak. It's what Jung would call our inferior function. So one thing we do at Animas is we help people discover which facets, usually one, there maybe two, that they're naturally strong in, and which one or two are particularly weak. And then we suggest they give themselves to the practices that would support their weaker facet. And so they're developing their wholeness. And what we need to begin the journey of soul initiation, and certainly a descent to soul, is we need to have some degree of cultivation of all four facets of these wholeness, of human wholeness. So you can see a really big distinction there. I'll just name these facets of wholeness and they'll give you a sense. Maybe I'll just give you a sentence on them. And we map this onto nature's template, which is nature itself is wholeness. And we come from that wholeness as humans because we come from nature. So I used 3 of nature's templates simultaneously to develop this map. And those templates are the 4 seasons, the 4 times of day, which of course, sunrise, noon, sunset, midnight, and the 4 cardinal directions, what we experience in the 4 different directions, like the north wind or the warmth of the sun. in the south for those of us in the northern hemisphere. Okay, so in the north, there's the facet of wholeness I call the nurturing generative adult. What's north about that, or midnight about that, or winter about that? I won't go into, but it's in the book, of course. The nurturing generative adult. And this, among other things, is our healer, including our capacity for self-healing. So this is a really important facet for healing. And it's also the facet of wholeness that we need to be a leader or to create, produce, manifest things. Just as a couple examples. In the East is what I call the innocent and the sage. Sometimes we just say the innocent sage. And this is the part of us that can see the big picture and is very good at staying present to the present moment and is good at not getting attached and clinging to things. And is, I guess, sometimes we call the East the guide to spirit. This is the part of us that orients towards light and ascent and a mystery or God. In the South is the one we call the wild indigenous one. Indigenous simply in the sense that, not that we're necessarily part of an intact indigenous culture, but that we're indigenous to Earth, that we are native human animals, and we experience our bodies that way, and we appreciate our bodies from this South facet. And we appreciate all our emotions, and we celebrate every emotion from this facet, and know and can learn what every emotion has to teach us and how to express it and how to help make our world, our personal world, a good place through the lessons of our emotions. And this South facet also naturally experiences our kinship with every species, with all of life in all habitats. And the West, finally, the West facet, we call the dark muse beloved. In this case, it's the inner beloved. It's, if we experience ourselves as masculine, this is the part of ourselves that's feminine, and vice versa, regardless of what kind of body we have. We can have a male body and experience our psyche as feminine. This would be our masculine aspect of our psyche. And the West loves to dive into the dark, the unknown, including dreams. The West is fascinated by the undoing of things, including the process of dying, and is essentially our muse, our deep imagination. Okay, so there's 4 facets. Part of preparing for the journey of soul initiation is cultivating the weaker of our facets of wholeness.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's a good place to pause, because it's really about wholeness, right? And looking at developing parts of ourselves that maybe we've neglected or abandoned or never come into relationship with.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what we're going to do now is we're going to close it down to the Facebook Live. Before we do that, though, Bill, I'd love for you to just share anything about any offerings that you have that you want to share with that community that feel relevant right now.
Yeah, thanks. So my organization is called Animas Valley Institute, where our office is located in Southwest Colorado in the valley of the Animas River in the town of Durango. And we have 20 guides, and we offer programs all around the world in something like 12 or 15 different countries, at least now. And if you go onto our website, you'll be able to see our currently listed offerings. And that's www.animas.org. Animas is actually the Spanish word for souls. better pronounced something like Animas, but the Anglos here just say Animas Valley Institute. So it's A-N-I-M-A. That second to last letter is real important. A-N-I-M-A-S.org. That's Spanish plural for souls. And you'll find there on the website our immersions, which are anywhere from 4 or 5 days long to 14 days long. We have year-long programs. And you might say, since only 25% of the people who come to our programs, the first program, are actually ready for the journey of soul initiation, one of our specialties is help people get ready. And with the tools we developed, we have found we can help people get ready in a matter of months. You can make up a lot of lost ground if you stop going for proficiency and prowess and you say yes to wholeness and balance.
That's great. Great place to leave it. And gentlemen that are tuned in in the Facebook group, if you want to have a deeper dive on any of these conversations with my guests, you can join the tribe. I'll keep promoting it in the group, just so you know. There's a small group of men that are in here that we're gonna open it up for questions for them with Bill. So if that interests you, you can jump in there. And thanks for tuning in. There we go. All right. Live stream is stopped. Wow, I've really enjoyed this conversation so much, Bill. Just your
Thank you.
breadth of knowledge is really powerful. Yeah, so I'm sure I could go into tons more of my own questions, and I'm happy to keep going that route. But I also want to invite men that are tuned in here to drop anything in. You can put something in the chat, or you can, we can unmute you and you can come on and ask a personal question. Anybody feeling inspired? Peter, you got something? Okay, great. Yeah, and Clyde, we got you up next. Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Bill. Thank you so much for your body of work. Thanks so much as well. I feel like my muse and my I'm very connected to spirit in my life, which I'm translating as I mean, I've only just I've been taking this 5-year journey into trying to mature into true adulthood. So I'll just say that. And I think I've been managing it pretty well, especially recently, but I'm feeling really called towards elderhood as well. And I'm worrying, I'm sort of worrying about this lack of elderhood that is also present in our contemporary societies. And I was wondering, so people that have found true adulthood, how do we reconcile the lack of elderhood, and what would you suggest there?
Well, of course, just in case it doesn't go without saying, I'll say it, that a elder is someone who, among other things, has been in true initiated adulthood for some number of years. 2 stages of adulthood. So, and what I mean by an elder is, again, completely off the map of Western society. Not only is the journey of soul initiation off the map, but what a true adult is and what a true elder is, in the way I come to understand it, which I think is at least consistent with intact nature-based peoples. It's not at all how we use the words adult or elder in this society. And there are some wonderful groups in the world doing work helping what we might call seniors to enter what they call elderhood. It's not what I would call elderhood, but it's the way they think about elderhood is a type of leadership which we offer our wisdom and contribution to our communities. And that is absolutely fabulous that there are groups effectively helping what we might put in quotes as older people find ways to contribute. So and I don't want to detract from that in any way whatsoever in anything I say. But if you're asking me about what I understand elders to be, then among other things, that people in late adulthood don't need a whole lot of help getting into elderhood, because mystery will place them there when they're ready. And people who are adults, true adults, who are getting close to elderhood, they're some of the most mature and competent people in any given village or society. They don't particularly need any help. They're the ones who are helping. You can say that the first half of life, which is the first 4 stages, as I understand the stages, the first 4 stages, 2 of childhood, 2 adolescence, it's the people in the last 4 stages, adults and elders, who are helping the children and the adolescents in their development, and also doing their adult work that usually goes beyond just helping children and youth. So the first half of life, we are growing and developing. By the first half, I'm not talking chronologically, I'm talking about these first 4 stages. We're developing and we're contributing to our society in ways that people in later stages can't. Like, one thing I often like to emphasize is that every stage is the best stage to be in when you're in it. Every stage is a great stage, including adolescence, if it's a healthy adolescence, which is rare these days. And a person in every stage has a gift that they give to their society and the world that people in later stages aren't as good as giving. Like, for example, early adolescents are really good at what I call fire, sexual fire, but also stylistic fire. A healthy early adolescent is going to create new languages and new styles of music and new ways of sexual expression and so forth that later people couldn't do if people in later stages couldn't do if they wanted to. And that stylistic fire is a beautiful, essential gift to our world. And so children and youth and adolescents aren't just recipients. They also gift the world in their own unique kind of or way that's expressive of their stage. Okay, I know you asked about elderhood. So for me, an elder is one way you could say it, as I said before, is that it's someone who's been through both stages of adulthood. The second stage of adulthood, by the way, in fact, sorry, let me back up. The first stage of adulthood is about primarily learning one or more delivery systems from a master, a delivery system that's consistent with the mythopoetic identity you discovered in late adolescence. You discover your mythopoetic identity in late adolescence. Mystery then moves you into adulthood. Now you have to find a delivery system to manifest, to deliver your gift to your people. And so the studying and mastery of a delivery system is what early adulthood is about. Late adulthood is creating your own never before seen delivery system, which you couldn't do unless you had that apprenticeship, which corresponds to early adolescence. Towards the end of late adulthood, when we've been offering our gift to the world by having created a new discipline, a new art, or at least a variation on a craft, mystery says, great, you've done it, and then tosses us into early elderhood. And the job of the early elder is to tend to the soul of the more than human community. Adults aren't doing that. Adults are busy with their particular soul work. When we enter true elderhood, we are no longer focusing on our soul work. Our soul work happens through us just by our presence, because we've been doing it for so long through 2 stages of adulthood. But someone's got to make sure that the human village is staying in a good relationship with the the more than human world, the larger Earth community. If we don't have elders doing that, things start going bad really quickly. Well, guess what? They did go really bad. And they are really bad in the world right now because we don't have enough elders who are tending to the relationship between the human village and the rest of the world. That's not all elders do, but that gives you a beginning sense. So again, if your question was, well, how do we help older people become elders? I'd say they don't need help, or they need a very esoteric kind of help.
I think you were asking more around like reconciling the lack of elderhood. I don't, are you saying there's like some angst or grief there for you, Peter?
I feel called to the role of more than human elderhood because of our situation, for example. You know, because of climate change and the messages that I receive from the earth, from the ecosystem. You know, I'm feeling called into that space because I think it's very necessary, and I think a lot more young people are being called into that space as well, although we don't have a lot of elders to kind of guide us in that process. That's kind of what I was saying, like in terms of the lack of elderhood, because we clearly need to be elders, and we need to find that eldership of, we need to find that very quickly, because yeah, like science, like you mentioned, scientists say we kind of have 6 years or so before these systems change irrevocably, you know. So that's kind of where my question was. It was sort of being called into that more than human space. Maybe I don't really feel ready. I don't think that the younger generations have the kind of tools that they need either. I'm not sure there's a question in there either, but I just benefit from your insight.
Yeah, well, again, you're using the word elder different than I am, which is fine. It's not like you're wrong or that I'm wrong. It's just we're talking about two different things. But now I'm clear about what you mean, Peter. And so some of you may be familiar with the work of Joanna Macy, the Buddhist scholar of Buddhism and the eco-philosopher, deep ecologist, creator of the work that reconnects. And she's the one who coined the phrase, the Great Turning, and says there's 3 dimensions of the Great Turning. Well, let's just look at the first one. The first one she says is essentially saving as much life as possible as our dominator cultural systems are collapsing. And that's the most urgent thing. That's in some ways the foundation. And there's many groups, of course, sometimes they're called environmental groups or conservation groups around the world who are doing everything they can to save as much life as possible. And then there are activist groups like Extinction Rebellion, for example, or the Occupy movement. There's a significant percentage, at least a significant minority of youth who recognize that the future of not only of their generation and their species, but the species, so many other species, depends on stopping this destruction of life and saving as much of life as possible. And whether a person, an older person, like, you know, past their 20s, is in the psychological stage of early adolescence, late adolescence, or adulthood, or true elderhood, they, by virtue of their years, have developed leadership capacities and a kind of wisdom that could support the youth in their movements to save as much life as possible. And so, yeah, it's like all hands on deck. Like, even if we're initiated adults and know what our soul work is, it's incumbent upon all of us to be contributing to the saving of as much life as possible. And one does not have to be, even in early adolescence, there are children who are doing this in ways more effective than many people in adult bodies. So anyway, I hope that helps a little bit.
Thanks, Bill. Appreciate that response. Yeah, we probably have time for one more question. Clyde, do you want to jump in?
Unmute myself here. Okay. Bill, nice to meet you here. And I learned about you from Alexis Slutsky, who works out here in the Ventura, Santa Barbara area. And there's a lot of concentric circles here because Soma and I were initiated as men of spirit by Frances Weller, who Alexis learned, the grief work from, and so she's doing that work out here too. And so I'm really appreciating your presence here today. I appreciate what you said, that there's never completion of the stages. And for Soma and myself, a dear brother in our circle died suddenly a couple of weeks ago, who was just a treasure. And I'm still filled with grief about it. And that grief opened up for me a new awareness, I'll just call it, of shame that I've been holding. And well, in your model, adolescent wounding, and so out of that has come a great catharsis, but also awareness of just kind of how my life has been out of balance from the trying to live out in, I want to say, to overcome the wound, or, right, which is kind of part of the issue in that stage, I think, where people could get stuck. Noticing my stuckness, noticing my patterns, and as well as recognizing my lifelong desire to stretch into these other values that are more holistic and more life-sustaining and more connected to the world, but also to the sacred. So there's this tension, and I'm having, I'm just aware of even more acutely now, the position I'm in trying to honor the wound and also heal. I'm a psychotherapist and a healer myself, and to also honor my soul's journey in wanting to bring out these other aspects of I guess of being with the sacred and so forth. So any thoughts you have on that, and working with people who are recognizing that they're kind of stuck in a stage and are stretched between stages even? Whew.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question, man. I love that.
Yeah, there's so much in there, boy.
Yeah.
So just a slight tweak of language, so that just make sure you're all clear. What I'm trying to say is that there's a stage and tasks of stages. So when we move from one stage to the next, we don't ever go back to earlier stages. Our center of gravity moves to the next stage and can go forward at some point, but it can't go backwards. But we have unfinished tasks of the earlier stages. That we're done with the stage, but we're not done with the tasks of that stage. Okay, but more importantly, to what you so beautifully and vulnerably shared here about shame, the grief of a beloved person leading to stirring up of some shame. So what I'm about to say is, I go into much more detail in my book, Wild Mind, but let's see if I can do justice to it briefly. Shame can be experienced from our wholeness, and it can be, but it's more commonly experienced from our woundedness. So in Wild Mind, the book, I mentioned that the first half is a map of our four facets of wholeness and practices for cultivating that wholeness. But the other half of the book is about our inner protectors, also known in psychosynthesis as our subpersonalities. These are like our inner critic is one, our wounded children, inner children, our wounded inner little boy is a subpersonality or inner protector. What Francis Weller calls our outcasts. I would say that's
brothers.
yeah, that's an example of an inner protector. Our inner addicts are inner protectors, and the shadow is a kind of inner protector. So there's many kinds. There's 4 categories of inner protectors, and I mapped them onto the 4 directions. So I believe it's usually makes sense to, when we are feeling toxic shame, as opposed to healthy shame. Yes, I really do believe there's such a thing as healthy shame. I'll come back to it if you'd like me to. But when it's that more toxic kind of shame, it makes sense to me to say it's one of our wounded children, or our wounded little boy who feels unworthy, which is actually a childhood survival strategy. That's what our inner protectors do. They came to life when we were children, sometimes very, very young children, to protect us, to develop as much safety as they can for us, psychosocial safety. And in the contemporary Western world, one of the ways that's so way too common, and tragically, is that there's a part of us, you might say it's an inner critic, that tells us we're unworthy. And if we believe that, it'll keep us from trying to stand out in any way. It'll keep us down. That sense of ineligibility that is associated with shame. And that's a very toxic experience. But there's the part of us that has been using that strategy, keeps using it because it worked to keep us safe when we were a kid. And that part of us that's using that strategy doesn't know we don't need it anymore, and it's not helping. So what we call self-healing is the process of using our resources of our 4 facets of wholeness, especially our nurturing generative adult, to embrace both the part of us who's shaming us and the part of us that feels shame, both parts. And the part of us that feels that shame needs to know that that it's not true, that we really are worthy. And the part of us that's keeping that shame going needs to be thanked for having done such a great job at keeping us safe when we were kids. And that part needs to know, needs to learn that we don't need that kind of help anymore, that we have more mature ways of helping ourselves, if we do. And if we do, depends on how much we've developed those 4 facets of wholeness. So you use the phrase honor the wounding. Well, I'm giving you a version of that. We're honoring the part of ourselves that has been wounding us that way, which we probably learned from somebody else in our life, like a parent and so forth. And we're honoring how it helped us in the past, but doesn't any longer, we don't need that anymore. That kind of safety that way. I'll just say briefly about healthy shame, because that seems like such a impossibility or a contradiction, that use the analogy of pain, that if I'm not able to feel physical pain, I'm in big trouble. And there's a disease where we don't feel that, it's called leprosy. But because I'm capable of feeling physical pain, I can protect myself when I just begin to feel something like a hot stove. Well, we as humans, we have values, and being that we're fragile flames as humans, that even if we have a well-developed sense of values, from time to time, we're going to inadvertently do something that violates one of our own values. Or we could have two values that are conflicting that led to our doing something that violated one of our values. It's really important to know when we've done that. Otherwise, we'll not know when we've really hurt someone else. And the experience we have as humans when we violate our own value is shame. But if we experience that shame from our wholeness, it's just really valuable information and allows us to engage in amends and apology and so forth. But I know the kind of shame you're talking about is more of that inner protector kind of thing that is not helping us. So I hope that helps at least a bit.
Yeah, it does. And I appreciate you terming it as a part that just doesn't know and has done its job well. And so that's kind of a roadmap to working with it and at some point not allowing it to, as my friend Kakuni would say, drive the bus all the time.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Yeah. In fact, we call it being hijacked by an inner protector.
Great. Thank you, Bill.
Yeah. Welcome.
Yeah,
Thank
that was
you.
a really helpful question. Thanks for bringing that, Claude. Well, I think we're at time. So I want to just offer my total humble thanks for you sharing with our community, Bill. Your work is really profound, and I think it's so important, such an important message to be bringing forward into the world right now. And I'm super inspired to keep sharing that and stay in my own process of development. So hopefully I can step into this mature adulthood and be able to offer my gifts forward. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for the invitation to be with you and the others today. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you, gentlemen, for bringing your presence and showing up here and being vulnerable. And we'll see you guys on the next call. Yeah. Have a beautiful day, everybody.
Okay. Thanks. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.